It's a no-brainer that many Resident Evil fanatics are eagerly anticipating the new RE3 remake, which is set to release this year. However, I don't think we can ever talk about this new remake without going over the foundation, the groundwork that was laid into place with the original. It was clear that the Wayback Machine was required for this one as we venture back to September 28th, daylight. The immediate outbreak tears through Raccoon City as Resident Evil 3 Nemesis illustrates that another survivor is fighting for dear life. You might be familiar with her if you followed the original title, as the heroine is none other than Jill Valentine, a member of S.T.A.R.S that appeared in the first iteration. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was initially greenlit after Resident Evil 2 became a smashing success. The bigwigs at Capcom were hell-bent on turning Resident Evil into a meta-series by producing multiple projects at the time like RE0 and gunning for a next generational experience with Code Veronica. Resident Evil 3's premise shifted in between concepts, and one main outline proposed Hunk as the main protagonist. He fought against G creatures on a cruise ship, for example. Interestingly enough, we have witnessed more infected creatures gallivanting around on a ship once Resident Evil Gaiden and Revelations 1 came into fruition with reused assets. Capcom decided that going back to the drawing board would be best after brainstorming ideas for a potential side expansion for Resident Evil 2. It quickly became prominent that Resident Evil's future was quickly being juggled over an oily tightrope with boiling tar underneath. Numerous jobs and a steady reputation still remained on the chopping block here. I would assume that Capcom promptly believed in compromising when necessary, since altering a project for ambitious nature gave the best result. I think I would say that it's these exact philosophies that created many executive decisions to accentuate their creative liberties. This notion correlated to changing the side expansion and retitling the game as Resident Evil 3, scrapping the cruise ship idea, rejecting the radically different gameplay choices, and fast-tracking this project. Those choices redefined Resident Evil 3 Nemesis as the game we all know and love today regardless. The most important question remains prevalent: is it worth playing the original 1999 version of Resident Evil 3? Let's begin with the gameplay, since that notion will always be the meat and potatoes of any video game review. This is a survival horror game. It is mostly fixed camera tank controls. If you played the previous two Resident Evil games, then you already know what to expect with the basics. As Jill Valentine, you will be foraging the city for ammunition while choosing to fight or flight nearby enemies who are known as biological weapons, or BOWs for short. Resident Evil 3 does chart some familiar territory by being identical to Resident Evil 1 and 2, but do not worry, this old dog still has new tricks up its sleeve, as evidenced by the new additions like the reloading tool. This item will craft gunpowder in some very intricate combinations. You can use this to make things like magnum rounds, freeze rounds that can stun enemies in place, and if you combine a singular gunpowder over and over again, then you'll have the tendency to create enhanced ammo. This can make your normal shotgun or handgun a bit more stronger when firing these enhanced rounds. We can't talk about the additions without mentioning the giant humanoid-sized elephant in the room with the face that no mother could love. The Nemesis T-Type could be described as a walking merchant of death. His goal is to murder the S.T.A.R.S team members who chose to stay behind in Raccoon City. You can see that this creature fits the job description effectively, coming after Jill's ass like discounted blueberry pancakes at an IHOP. You can either run or try to take on this hulking behemoth, but the latter won't be easy since Nemesis is highly durable and he can follow you from room to room with ease. Throw in a slew of insta-kill animations if you're low on health, and this changes the easier dynamics of Resident Evil 2 and turns them into a hellacious frenzy with Resident Evil 3. Once again, it is important to remain calm even in the most extreme situations. There is some silver lining involved with the risk reward system. You can knock down this ugly stand-in for Santa Claus and he will drop some gifts along the way once you decide to KO him. These items dropped by Nemesis create gun parts for better equipment, first aid boxes, or even giving the ability for infinite ammo for a singular weapon that is selected by player choice during New Game Plus. It's a nice accommodation if you decide to say it's time to swallow your pride and fight. With all this fun involved, you must be wondering about my gripes. I can say this game does have a few signs of weakness. This namely comes from the new addition called Emergency Dodge. Emergency dodging was a neat idea on paper, yet is flawed in execution. If you manage to aim at the right time while tapping the action button, then you will see Jill push an enemy out of the way, or she'll do a maneuver that avoids enemy offense. The problem with this mechanic is that the timing is way too strict and it doesn't flow naturally with the given control scheme upon execution. There are times where I felt like this dodge should have had 2 dedicated buttons instead of waiting for it to specifically trigger whilst aiming. It feels like it activates whenever it wants, and I have been slapped around by Nemesis even if the dodge mechanic activated around him. This addition definitely felt more like an oversight as opposed to a mechanic that is actually viable in these intense situations. The dodging best works on zombies, while everything else just feels like a 50-50 gamble that will conclude by either avoiding the hit or taking one on the chin. There are also cases of randomly generated moments, or RNG for short, that was made to obscure the fact that the original Resident Evil 3 was a very short playthrough. Let me explain with some context here about what I'm talking about. There is a choice system called live selection, and it will flash in an inverted color on your screen, and then you will be granted an option to choose a certain decision. It's like those early choose your adventure style choices that will give you several different outcomes within the game as you progress. You can choose to successfully KO Nemesis and get a free item drop, or you can choose to hide from him so he can leave the area for good without being aware of Jill's presence, for example. It's a neat concept that does add replay value into this particular mix, but the real problem stems from the fact that the RNG system can do its damnness to annoy you at key points in the game. There's gunpowder at the Raccoon sales office, and then there's not gunpowder at the Raccoon sales office because of RNG. There's zombie dogs in the section of Raccoon Park, and now there's hunters in the section of Raccoon Park because of RNG. There's also randomly generated sporadicness tied to every puzzle because we needed to pad out the water puzzle just for you guys, as to not make the solution definitive. Honestly, look, I understand why they did this. They wanted to make every playthrough seem unique and different, and they did kind of accomplish this, but I really think they should have thought about this better. And thinking of the implementation of hard or extra riddle in Silent Hill 2, that was a really well done established change that I think they should have went with for Resident Evil 3. I can commend Konami for having a set solution every single time, even if the puzzles were different or harder depending on the difficulty. You didn't get things ripped away from you. The RNG in this game will either be for better or for worse, especially when it comes to items, and I guarantee the latter is annoying to deal with when you're really in a bind for ammo, or you don't know how to solve this particular puzzle in question in front of you because it's not the same every time. The controls specifically resonate with tank controls. Up is to walk if your character is facing in a distinct direction, and when the camera shifts, you can adjust your movement accordingly. It's not the worst thing in the world outside of getting stuck on key pieces of geometry if you happen to run through a narrow pathway. It serves its purpose for what it does, yet it can make tight evasion hard to master, so you're better off whipping out your gun if you feel like you can't get by a huge horde that is pinning you down. One neat feature is the implementation of the 180 turn that allows Jill to turn about face and run away in the opposing direction. It's a lot more helpful than you think it is, ending up as a staple for fight or flight with tank controls. The graphics in this game look very much identical to the original Resident Evil 2. I'm dead serious. It's not a bad thing. It's not bad to look good and look identical at the same time. You know, they weren't doing revolutionary things like mouths moving yet back then. and they didn't have eyes blink yet either. I won't dwell too much on this topic because I don't really feel like Resident Evil 3 is a huge graphical update compared to the previous rendition. Nemesis looks great and grotesque, but you can say the same for Birkin. The only merit I think I can give Resident Evil 3 lies strictly in the environmental department. There's a lot of abandoned city streets, and it really gives you that sense of isolation as you roam deeper on foot. That was one of my small nitpicks with Resident Evil 2. There's way too much time spent indoors, whereas Resident Evil 3's attention to graphical detail lies on the fact that it's in a living, breathing city that used to be a town before it became a nightmare. At this point, I'm going to assume that there is going to be probably some first-time viewers who are first experiencing Resident Evil 3. If you don't want spoilers, then I would suggest clicking off the video at this point. I will talk about the story segment here. You can jump to this timestamp when the story segment is over. Thank you very much. The story takes place before and after Resident Evil 2. I thought that was an interesting way to do things since the city doesn't seem to be getting any better during the wee days of September 28th through October 1st. The game begins with police and first responders still utilizing all their forces and fighting against the undead horrors. The police team is readily decimated before the Walking Dead as Jill Valentine says goodbye to her life, her previous existence incarnate. Jill heads up her own investigation against Umbrella instead of going to Europe immediately with Chris Redfield. This choice certainly puts the heroine in a complete bind since she fell victim to the whole city collapsing around her due to the T-virus outbreak caused by William Birkin and the USS. The first half chronicles Jill's adventures through the decimated Raccoon City streets as she tries to find various survivors along the way. The most important survivors you'll be spending time with is a paramilitary force called Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service. These ragtag mercenaries were sent in to extract survivors as they tried pulling out if the mission became too severe. Sadly, this was the case as various soldiers seen during the intro, which are the UBCS, fell victim to the zombified creatures around the city. There's only Mikhail, Carlos, and Nikolai remaining, with Mikhail extremely injured and Nikolai potentially going rogue later in the story. The team then suggests powering on a derelict cable car to blast through the immediate dangers so they can reach the clock tower for extraction. Jill ultimately powers the car, but Mikhail sacrifices himself in an ensuing battle with Nemesis. The train crashes near St. Michael's as Jill roams around the complex to find a way out. She's successful at signaling the chopper, but Big, Tall, Bad, and Ugly has a different agenda. He fires a rocket directly at Jill's only escape route, turning the chopper into twisted debris. It's at this point that Jill is infected with the T-virus by yours truly. For the sake of speeding it up, she's knocked out cold while Leon starts dicking around at the RPD. We then move the story to October 1st as Carlos desperately searches for a cure that could rid Jill's T-virus away for the time being. He does so, and the duo eventually ends up at the Dead Factory. After a long, arduous bout with Nemesis, he is finally defeated by Jill as she delivers all the stars he could ask for, happily ever after, except for the part where all the remaining survivors are caught up in a nuclear explosion that ravaged Raccoon City for good. The story is pretty simplistic at best, but intricate with its characterization, and it's really good. The character drama really sells you on the idea that this is Jill's last escape within Raccoon City. Is it perfect? Well, no. It could have used a few more connections to RE2 to make it fully interwoven with those characters before the outbreak even started. Also, I'm sure this is another no-brainer. I feel like they could have fleshed out some more time with us, Jill, and the UBCS. I hope that Resident Evil 3 Remake follows suit with a deeper character study, allowing us to relate more and more to these soldiers a tad. Overall, I enjoyed the story, and I think they truly accomplished ending the Raccoon City arc the best way that they could. For the closing segment, I'll talk about replay value. I will also talk about recommending this game or not. As I said earlier, Resident Evil 3 is a pretty short game. 3 to 4 hours is all it takes to beat this experience in one go. It's not as cool as playing as 2 additional characters with A and B scenarios, which Resident Evil 2 does perfectly. The imminent creeping dread of Nemesis is sure to give more Resident Evil veterans a challenge. Live selection does change your location despite some RNG to it. It is nifty since it can lead to some alternate story branches while experiencing familiar beats. This gives you some incentive to go back and experience those alternate story paths during New Game Plus to make different choices. It will be great seeing how well you can adapt given the outcome. If you feel froggy, you can also try to gun for alternate costumes in the game that unlocks under certain conditions. Costumes are definitely a superficial add-on at best, but the option is there in case you care about cosmetics in the first place. The last piece of content centers on an unlockable premise called Operation Mad Jackal. This was the Mercenaries mode before it was popularized as a confined gauntlet run. The goal of this minigame is simple. You spawn near the tram where the mercenaries created a makeshift base. You must run all the way back to the initial warehouse while battling creatures along the way. Killing a creature secures a time bonus. The harder enemies will also give you higher amounts of time if you manage to down those big foes like Nemesis. You can also use any lingering red barrels to your advantage, which can blow up enemies for a high time multiplier. There's also survivors that you can save along the way that can give you either ammo or gun parts for a job well done. You might want to hurry up and save these guys since these civilian lives are at stake and also put against the clock. If you get there too late, then the survivor will be found dead with no item drop. You have 3 UBCS soldiers to choose from: Carlos, Mikhail, and Nikolai. Each character has their own strengths and weaknesses with the given loadouts, so Mikhail is the most armed individual, yet he has the biggest hitbox. Nikolai only has a knife, but he could take a bit of punishment. Can you get to the survivors in time? Once you complete Operation Mad Jackal, you will receive bonus points depending on how well you did, which allows you to gain infinite ammo for a job well done. Operation Mad Jackal is merely a flash in the pan that you could play for a little bit to gain bonus score. Once you have all the items, I would say it sticks to a singular course without adding too much variation. It does take skill to beat this mode with Carlos or Nikolai, which I can easily give you a pat on the back for if you manage to get the S rank with those 2 efficiently. That being said, the novelty can wear down like a wilted flower when you're repeating the exact same areas, enemies, and layout. Capcom should have made a more divergent pathway or utilized levels of difficulty that was present in Extreme Battle. By taking these instances under advisement with the rearranged stages or monsters, it would have kept Operation Mad Jackal just a bit more fresher. Imagine starting off at the clock tower and running to the dead factory as an alternate route with a different character. I'm still glad they tried to do something different, so there's an early foundation to Mercs if you're one of those replay freaks who loves a little repetition. Personally, I played this mode like maybe 3 or 4 times, and once you unlock infinite ammo, there's not much else to write home about that could have extended the longevity. Overall, I would say that Resident Evil 3 Nemesis has some lingering minuscule flaws, like how they handle portions of RNG and not having enough mini games to sink your teeth into like the DualShock version of RE2. However, the strengths do stand bright with a more post-pounding experience and the implementation of 360 turns alongside an ingenious ammo system that seemed revolutionary for its time. I give Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, the classic on PlayStation 1, a score of an 8 out of 10. Once again, this is Renegade Operative signing off. Hopefully you guys really enjoyed this classic retro review of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis before the remake drops upon us at April 3rd, 2020. Or April 4th, or one of those days. I'm just hyped for the game. I'm really excited, fam. I really need this game in our hands right now. I need to play it. I need to experience it. And once again, you know, I'm going to be streaming it, so I can't wait for that. If you really like this review, please slap a like. Please subscribe. Please tell me in the comments, what did you think of the original Resident Evil 3 back in the day compared to Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 1? Tell me what you thought. Let me know your nitpicks and issues with the game, as well as your positives, what you think about it, and I will be here listening and awaiting your comments, and let's talk it up. Once again, I will see you guys next time. Follow me in the social media links in the description below. And once again, be good people, be safe, be quarantined, practice social distancing, and once again, take care. I will see you guys next time. Later.